There are moments in Scripture where heaven seems to pause, moments where God's sovereign plan is so perfectly aligned with a human response that it causes a divine reaction. Now, I want you to imagine this with me today. Not a moment of disobedience or rebellion, but a moment of obedience so radical, so pure, so unexpected by the standards of this world that it shocked heaven. A moment when all of heaven leaned forward in awe, when you made a move not out of fear, but faith, not out of self, but surrender, not out of comfort, but calling. There are stories throughout the Bible where someone makes a move that isn't logical, isn't safe, isn't ordinary, and each time it catches the attention of God in a remarkable way. Think about Abraham. God told him to leave everything familiar, to walk away from his country, his people, and his father's household. And Abraham obeyed. Not later, not after weighing options, not with conditions. He just went. And Scripture tells us it was credited to him as righteousness. One move of obedience, one step of faith, one decision that made heaven take note. Now bring that forward to today. You made a move recently. Maybe no one else saw it. Maybe it wasn't broadcast or applauded. Maybe you didn't even fully grasp the magnitude of what you did, but heaven saw it. God saw it. And he was moved. Not surprised because he didn't know. He's omniscient. But surprised in the same way Jesus was when he turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched me?" when the woman with the issue of blood reached out in desperate faith. She didn't follow protocol. She didn't wait to be invited. She reached out, believing, and Jesus said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." That kind of faith, unexpected, unshaken, unrelenting, stirs the heart of God. That kind of bold, quiet obedience still moves heaven. And I want to tell you something today. You did that. You shocked heaven. You made a move that was born not out of pride or fear, but of trust in the character of God. It wasn't what others would have done. It wasn't the easy route, but it was the right one. Maybe you forgave someone who never asked for it. Maybe you gave sacrificially when you barely had anything to give. Maybe you chose purity in a world that mocks holiness. Maybe you left a relationship, a job, or a dream that didn't align with God's will. Or maybe you stepped into something that scared you, a calling, a ministry, a surrender. Whatever it was, it mattered more than you know. You see, heaven isn't impressed by what impresses the world. Heaven moves when the human heart submits fully to the will of the Father. That one move you made, God saw it. The angels saw it. And heaven wasn't expecting that. Not because they doubted you, but because so few choose obedience when it costs. So few choose the narrow way. So few choose faith when fear screams louder. But you did. You shocked God, not in the sense of catching him off guard, but in the sense that you blessed him. You pleased him. You glorified him in a way that turned heads in heaven. Think about that. Your move, your moment, your obedience echoed in the halls of glory. And the ripple of that decision may reach farther than you will ever know. Let me assure you, God takes note of the faithful. He marks the humble. He rewards the obedient. When you made that move, something shifted. Not just in your life, but in the heavenly realm. Doors began to open, strongholds began to fall. The enemy was silenced. Why? Because you aligned yourself with the will of God. And that alignment always carries power. You weren't trying to impress. You weren't trying to perform. You were just trying to be faithful. And that, friend, is the kind of move heaven wasn't expecting, because it came from a heart fully surrendered, fully trusting, fully yielded. So don't underestimate what you did. Don't second guess your obedience. Don't let the silence that followed make you think it wasn't noticed. It was. Heaven took note. And God, your Father, your Redeemer, your King, was moved. You shocked him in the best possible way. And there is a reward coming. There is favor unfolding. There is a testimony being written. And it all started with that one move. Radical obedience in hidden moments captures the attention of heaven. It's not always the grand gestures or the public declarations that stir the heart of God. Sometimes it's the quiet decisions made behind closed doors when no one is watching, when applause is absent, and when the stakes feel personal and high. Obedience that costs something is not easy, especially when it's hidden from others and brings no immediate reward or recognition. Yet it is in those moments that God sees the depth of the heart. Obedience in obscurity reflects the truest form of devotion because it is untethered to approval and driven solely by a desire to honor God. Throughout Scripture, God honors those who obey him without needing to be seen. Joseph chose righteousness in private when no one would have blamed him for taking revenge or seeking justification. Daniel prayed in secret, even when doing so could have cost him everything. Mary said yes to an assignment that would bring shame before honor. These hidden acts of obedience reflected a faith rooted not in what God gives, but in who God is. And heaven always responds to such trust. These moments, though invisible to the world, are fully visible to the God who weighs the motives of the heart. When a believer chooses integrity over compromise, forgiveness over bitterness, purity over popularity, that's when heaven leans in. Radical obedience is rarely easy and often misunderstood, but it always places you in alignment with divine favor, not because it earns merit, but because it reveals surrender. It shows that the person is not merely a hearer of the word, but a doer. It reveals spiritual maturity because real obedience isn't about convenience, it's about conviction. And conviction grows in private, away from the spotlight, where the only audience is the one who matters most. There are angels who witness your prayers when you could have given up. There are heavenly records of the tears you shed as you said yes to something uncomfortable simply because you knew God was leading you there. Every time you resisted temptation, every time you obeyed the nudge of the Spirit, every time you said no to the flesh and yes to the cross, you activated heaven's awareness. God is not indifferent to obedience. He honors it. He celebrates it, and he uses it to orchestrate breakthroughs you can't even see coming. You may have thought no one noticed, but God did. And that obedience sent a ripple into the spiritual realm. This kind of hidden obedience is what separates casual Christians from committed disciples. It's what defines spiritual authority. You don't get divine promotion through platforms. You get it through private surrender. Heaven looks for vessels that are shaped in the secret place. Your obedience in the fire, in the quiet, in the pain. It's building a testimony. It's releasing angels. It's drawing you deeper into the heart of God. When no one clapped, God smiled. When others questioned your choices, heaven applauded your courage. That one move you made in private didn't just please God, it marked you for something greater. Obedience in the hidden place becomes power in the public place. God often elevates people who have proven faithful when there was no visible reward. He sees what is done in secret and rewards openly. But the reward is never the motivation. The motivation is love. The motivation is reverence. The motivation is the recognition that pleasing God matters more than pleasing people. When you choose to follow God without needing an audience, you demonstrate that your faith is not performative, it's personal, it's pure. And that kind of faith draws heaven's attention in ways you may never fully understand on this side of eternity. Uncommon faith triggers divine response and spiritual momentum. It's the kind of faith that moves beyond safe boundaries, beyond what makes sense, beyond what others are willing to risk. This faith refuses to wait for confirmation from people or proof in the natural. It steps into the unknown because it knows the character of God, not just the promises of God. This kind of faith stuns the heavens because it mirrors the boldness of those who dared to believe when everything around them said otherwise. It's the faith of the centurion who told Jesus he didn't need to come to his house, just say the word. It's the faith of the woman who broke her alabaster jar in worship, pouring out everything without reserve. It's the faith of Peter stepping out onto water, eyes locked on Jesus even while the storm still raged. God responds to this kind of faith because it honors him deeply. It's not faith in an outcome. It's faith in the one who holds the outcome. That distinction matters. Most people have faith in results, in what they can receive and what they expect God to do for them. But uncommon faith says, even if he doesn't, I will still trust. That's the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's the faith of Esther when she said, if I perish, I perish. That's the faith that refuses to bow even when fire is guaranteed. And when God sees it, he moves. He moves not because he is manipulated by faith, but because he is magnified through it. Uncommon faith isn't loud or boastful, it's steady, it's quiet confidence in the face of noise. It's believing God in the delay, praising him in the disappointment, standing firm when nothing is shifting. This kind of faith isn't rooted in hype, it's rooted in relationship. It flows out of knowing who God is, his nature, his goodness, his sovereignty. When someone walks in this level of faith, they start to shift spiritual environments. Their trust becomes contagious. Their declarations of hope become weapons in the hands of others. They ignite momentum not only in their own lives, but in the lives of those around them. Faith creates movement. It breaks stagnancy. It attracts heaven's power and paralyzes hell's agenda. Many people wait for conditions to change before they move, but uncommon faith moves and lets the conditions catch up. It builds arks when there's no rain. It gathers empty vessels when oil is scarce. It praises loudly in prison cells and sings songs at midnight. This faith redefines what's possible. It opens Red Seas. It levels Jericho walls. It feeds thousands with a few loaves and fish. It doesn't just believe that God can, it lives as if he already had. And that kind of posture draws supernatural acceleration. When you act in uncommon faith, you're not just stepping into your own breakthrough, you're stepping into alignment with heaven's agenda. That means what you believe begins to create room for others to believe too. Miracles multiply in the atmosphere of faith. Chains break, diseases flee, provision appears. But more than all that, God is glorified. Because uncommon faith doesn't point to the person who believes. It points to the God who is worthy of that belief. This faith cannot be fabricated or faked. It is forged in trial, refined in waiting, and activated through obedience. It is not a feeling. It is a decision, a choice to trust even when trust feels foolish, a choice to believe when doubting seems logical, a choice to move when fear begs you to freeze. When heaven sees that, it responds. The throne room echoes with favor. The angels move into assignment. The Word begins to manifest. What once seemed stuck gains momentum. What once seemed dead begins to stir. Faith speaks, and heaven listens. Faith moves, and heaven answers. One unseen act of surrender can shift both earthly outcomes and heavenly atmospheres. It doesn't take a platform, a spotlight, or a crowd to make an eternal impact. It only takes a heart yielded to God in complete trust. The kind of surrender that heaven recognizes is often silent, sacrificial, and deeply personal. It happens in moments where decisions are made not for visibility, but for obedience. It happens when no one is watching, when applause is absent, when choosing God's will means letting go of control, comfort, or clarity. And it's in those moments that the unseen act sends waves through the spiritual realm and causes heaven to respond. Surrender is not weakness, it is power. True surrender says, not my will, but yours be done, even when God's will means walking through a storm, stepping into the unknown, or laying something down that feels essential. It is the most courageous decision a believer can make. Abraham's willingness to lay Isaac on the altar was not about losing a son. It was about proving that nothing, not even the promise, was more important than the God who gave it. That one act triggered a generational blessing. It shifted his legacy. It activated a covenant. Earthly obedience aligned with heavenly purpose, and the result was nothing short of miraculous. There is something powerful about surrender because it forces the believer to confront idols. It reveals what we truly trust in, what we cling to, and what we fear losing, but surrender breaks those chains. It clears the clutter in our hearts. It brings us into the holy center of God's will. And that alignment opens doors in the natural that had been shut. When a believer fully surrenders, they are no longer operating from human limitation, but from divine positioning. That shift changes everything. It changes how prayers are heard, how favor is released, and how spiritual battles are won. Heaven responds to surrender because it reflects the posture of Christ himself. He surrendered in the garden. He laid down his rights, his strength, his comfort for the sake of the Father's plan. And that act of obedience didn't just redeem humanity, it broke the power of hell. So when we mirror that kind of surrender, even on a smaller scale, we enter into that same power. We stop fighting in our own strength and begin moving in divine authority. What looks like loss becomes gain. What feels like the end becomes a beginning. What seems like surrender becomes victory. One act, that's all it takes. One moment of open-handed obedience. One choice to say yes to God when everything in you wants to say no. One step toward the altar. That kind of act shifts things you cannot see. It causes the enemy to tremble. It brings clarity to confusion. It accelerates answers to long-standing prayers. It may not look like much to the world, but in the courts of heaven it carries enormous weight. Because God is not measuring talent, resources, or performance. He's looking at the heart. A surrendered heart is a magnet for divine movement. When you surrender something to God, you're not just letting it go. You're placing it into hands that can multiply it, redeem it, and repurpose it far beyond what you imagine. Earthly outcomes begin to rearrange when heaven is given full access. Miracles become possible. Restoration takes root. Breakthrough becomes inevitable. And even more than what God does for you, surrender allows God to work in you. It purifies motives. It deepens faith. It produces fruit that lasts. Heaven doesn't require perfection, but it responds to surrender every time. There are moments in life when God will call for something dear, not because he wants to harm, but because he wants to free. And it's in that moment that your surrender becomes a seed that when planted in faith brings a harvest in its due season. You may not see the immediate result, But you can be certain that heaven saw it. Angels record it. The Spirit affirmed it. And your life will never be the same because of it. That one act of surrender didn't just affect your journey, it made heaven move on your behalf. What looked like a sacrifice was actually a setup for the supernatural.